1916, a group of Japanese immigrants to Canada got together and decided that they were going to train to offer their services to the Canadian Army for the First World War. 100 years later, in 2016, we at the museum have decided to honor their participation in the war by mounting this exhibit commemorating Japanese-Canadian involvement on behalf of Canada in the First World War. The title warrior spirit comes from the idea of Bushido, which is the samurai code that was very popular around the turn of the 20th century, which was about the warrior code of the samurai and became inspired by that during their service. So the original plan for the Canadian-Japanese Volunteer Corps was to assemble all the able-bodied, willing Japanese-Canadian men from the community and offer themselves as a full battalion of all Japanese Canadians for the Canadian section of the British Army. Canada joined the war in 1914. As the war went on into 1915 and 1916, it started to become apparent that Canada really needed more men to be signing up to serve overseas as troops. And the Japanese-Canadian community, one, wanted to serve their country and show their loyalty, but also saw it as an opportunity to show their loyalty for the purpose of proving themselves that they had the right to the same rights as other Canadian citizens because they were willing to make the same sacrifices and serve the same duties. Over 220 soldiers, Canadians of Japanese descent, who served for the British Army in World War I. Each of the soldiers who served in the First World War got what was called a British War Medal, which was honoring their service to the British Army under the Canadian contingent of it. And most of the Japanese-Canadian soldiers also got what's called a Victory Medal for being part of the Army during the armistice at the end of the war. During the Second World War, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in the United States, and that led to both the United States and Canada declaring war on Japan. At that point in time, the Japanese-Canadian First World War veterans were older, but many of them were still around, and they were part of a legion that actually sent a telegram to the Prime Minister saying, "We know that Canada and Japan are at war, but we want to offer our services to our country, Canada, in whatever way we can." There's definitely a sense of pride for the veteran families, even 100 years later, for the Japanese Canadians who served in the First World War. It is a lesser known part of our history, especially since for the Japanese Canadians, what's really well known is the human rights abuses related to our treatment during the Second World War. But in the First World War, it was more straightforward because Japan and Britain were, and therefore Canada, were allies. So there was no question of where their loyalty was. It was to both Japan and Britain.